Hi, I'm Colin Lambert, and welcome again to Insights from Innovators. And I'm founder of Lambert Creative Media. So great to have you with us today, and excited about the opportunity to continue this video series. It really is about inspiring you, encouraging you, motivating you, and me at the same time to continue to grow and expand in our knowledge and our understanding of the world around us and how we do the things we do to do them better, to encourage us, to encourage others, create, innovate, lead, engage. Those are really the four key areas that we're looking at each and every week. And so I hope that you've taken advantage of looking back at the first two programs. Talked to Chris Fabry, an author first, and Hannah Lynn Miller, a young blogger, fashion blogger, and follower of Christ the last week. And this week, I'm thrilled to be able to bring in a friend and a colleague in the business. But first, let me just remind you, if you're interested in this kind of programming, something that inspires you, motivates you, encourages you in your work, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's brand new. We're just getting folks signed up, but it will notify you when stuff is coming up. So please subscribe and share it as you engage. It's a lot of help to me, and it spreads the word as well and gets some of this great content out to other people. I mentioned my guest this week is a friend in recent years, a colleague for many years, a mentor in many ways. He is an author, a pastor, and a radio veteran. And you probably recognize his name from Family Life Today, many years as co-host of that. You hear his voice now on Alistair Begg's program, Truth for Life. And just thrilled to have him with us today on Insights from Innovators. Bob Lepine, welcome to the program. Great to have you here today.
Listeners should know that we've known each other for a long time, right?
Yes, we have known each other a long time. I was on the radio here in Austin, Texas for many years, except really for my sojourn for 15 years to Chicago. But at the time I was on the radio in Austin, you were on a station in San Antonio, KSLR. And I actually used to listen to you, Bob. I think I've told you the story before, but I spent many, many hours in my early years, especially in talk programming, listening to you, how you did your work, what you did, how you engaged with people, the kinds of questions you asked. And I would say you were, whether you meant to be or not, you really were a mentor to me in those years. And I'm just grateful for that. But yes, a long-time friendship and partnership in recent years. It's great to have you here on the program.
Great to be here, and folks should know that our signals overlapped a little bit, and
They
so there
did.
were times when we were sharing listeners, and times. Should we tell them about the roller skate thing that we did?
Sure, go ahead.
So we decided in San Antonio that we would do a skate night in Austin, that we would have people invite them out to a skating rink, get our Austin area listeners to come join us for a roller skating night. And I think it was when you found out that we were doing it, you thought, no, 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 no. And so you scheduled an alternate skate night with better prizes and lower admission and all of that the same night as ours. And I think we had 20 people show up for ours, and yours was a massive success. And we never did another skate night in Austin after that.
Well, you were licensed to San Antonio. I mean, come on, that was the way it was supposed
I
to
was
work.
coming. It was a frontal attack into your territory, and you like the Ukrainians, you successfully repelled the
I pushed you
invasion.
back. I pushed you back. Well, that was the one of the few successes tied to any kind of competitions we had. You've had such a stellar career, and I want to touch on a few pieces of it. But I want to start back a little bit earlier in your life. Something some folks may not know. You originally had a desire to be a lawyer. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that started when I was 12 years old and watching reruns of Perry Mason on TV, and I thought I want to be the guy who can out argue anybody and get them to finally say, "You're right, I confess, I admit it." I thought, that what better job could there be than that? And then when I was in junior high, I remember hearing about how lawyers could help people who were disenfranchised or down and out, poor people who needed legal representation. So I was motivated by some of that, and really had planned all the way through undergraduate school, through college. I had planned that when I graduated, I would apply and go on to law school. And I had somebody give me some counsel before I went to college. They said, don't take pre-law, because they said if you change your mind, then you've got a degree that's worth nothing. And law school doesn't care whether it's pre law or anything else. They just want to see if you made good grades. So I said, okay, I'm going to take something that'll be fun. And I took radio and television broadcasting because I thought that would be fun. And I took a summer job after I graduated from college at a local clear channel station, a news talk station, as a news talk reporter and anchor man. And halfway through the summer, they came and they said, we like what you're doing. We'll give you a raise. Why don't you postpone law school for a year? And I thought, if I do that, I may never get to law school, but I was having fun. The raise sounded good. Hitting the books did not sound good. So I took that path and figured if it doesn't work out, I'll go to law school at that point. And that's still my plan. If broadcasting doesn't work out, I'll go to law school at that point.
I think it worked out, Bob. I do think it worked out pretty well. Well, that's fascinating, and I, like you, was a big fan of some of those law shows on television. And it's interesting how those things shape us. As you began to get into radio, you said they came to you and said they were liking what you were doing. What was your experience as you started it? Did you really enjoy it from the very beginning? And tell me a little bit about those early days of radio. What were you doing?
Well, a lot of us who are in radio for a lifetime have the same story. We used to go to bed with transistor radios under our pillow. I mean, I remember at age 6 getting a radio in my bedroom when my sister went to camp for 2 weeks. I got her radio in my bedroom, and I woke up every morning listening to a radio station where they played records and were just having a blast. And I thought, you mean you can get a job where you play records and have a party every morning? I mean, I want that job. So there's this fascination with the whole world of radio. I think I've always been kind of an audio learner more than a visual or a kinesthetic learner. I learn by listening. And so I've always been drawn toward words and toward sound. And uh, so radio was always my area of interest. And then to see the connection that can be made between a listener, between an audience and someone who's on the radio, especially as somebody who's broadcasting realizes we're talking to people one at a time. Uh, I've coached a lot of people over the years and said, you're not talking to all those people out there in radio land. You're talking to the one guy who's driving along in his car or the one woman who is in the kitchen. And that's who you want to connect with as you do this. And that connection can be deep and solid and profound. And initially I was involved in news talk radio as a news reporter and anchor. I did that for about a year and a half without ever thinking Christian radio was anything I'd be interested in, because honestly, the state of the art Christian radio in the late 1970s was not anything that appealed to me as a listener. And then I started to hear new contemporary Christian music that was along the lines of what I liked to listen to. And I started to hear some pretty solid Bible teaching by people like Chuck Swindoll and John MacArthur and Focus on the Family. And I thought, if you had enough programs like this, you could have a solid format out of this. And so after about a year and a half, 2 years of general market radio, I went to work for the local Christian station in Tulsa. And for the next 5 years, KCFO, AM and FM, teaching and talk on the AM, music on the FM. We just saw God use the station in some powerful ways in people's lives. And I got to see how powerful radio can be in impacting people's lives. And that's why I've been drawn to it, I think.
Two questions related to some of those radio experiences. First, do you remember the first time you heard yourself on the radio?
I do. And I think I heard myself on tape before I heard myself on the radio. And you hear your voice on tape and you go, do I really sound like this? The sound you have in your head is much different than the sound you hear back in your ears the first time you hear it, but you get used to it after that. But yeah, beyond that, to be driving along as a news reporter and hear my story come up on the radio, and hear yourself, it's one of those things that is very fulfilling, and you pinch yourself a little bit. It's kind of like my voice is on the radio. Not a whole lot of people have their voice on the radio every day, and to have mine there was something that was just, it was affirming, and it was just the hand of God saying that I've got you where I want you and where I'm going to use you.
Flip side of that, from the person speaking to the person listening, do you remember early on the first experiences of beginning to realize that people were responding to what you were doing and what you thought about that immediacy factor of radio?
Yeah, I remember a variety of I don't know if I remember the first time of that, but I remember the stories we heard, I think particularly at KCFO in Tulsa, the Christian station, where we would hear stories about, um, something that had been said, something you'd said, something that had I'll tell you a funny story here. We had a Friday night show on KCFO called Dr. Rapinto. Now, radio listeners will recognize that there's been a guy named Dr. Demento who's been on the radio for years. So we decided just for fun to have our own show called Dr. Rapinto. And it was the same kind of a funny, it was a little bit like the Babylon Bee on radio. Okay. We just had fun with stuff. And one night, it was April 1st, Friday night, April 1st, and we decided to play an April Fool's joke. And we had the general manager, Dennis Worden, come on at the beginning, and he said, "We're sorry to inform you that our station it's been sold. We're not going to be a Christian station anymore. We're going to rock music immediately." 10 o'clock on a Friday night. Nobody switches over their station at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. And it's now going to be KROK radio. And so he's making this somber announcement, and our production director comes on and he says, "It's the new K-Rock radio, and here's Todd Rundgren," and he plays a song, about 30 seconds of the song, and then he stops and says, "April Fools," and we go back into the Dr. Rapinto show. Okay, so we pulled all of that off. Well, here's the story we heard later. A dad pulls us aside and says, "I was walking by my daughter's bedroom at 10 o'clock on Friday night, and she says in tears, 'Daddy, come here, listen. The station has been sold. It's going to be a rock radio station.'" And she was crying, and the dad was comforting her. And Todd Rundgren starts, and they turn off the radio, and he says, "We just need to pray, sweetheart." And so they prayed together, that God would do something and raise up a Christian station. Well, she comes back out 15 minutes later and says, "Daddy, the prayer worked. It's a Christian station." So you hear stories like that, and you think, in a fun way, you're connecting with people. God's using it. In the first few years of family life today, we would run into a lot of people who, Dennis Rainey and I would say, "I listen to you guys. I really like it. You guys laugh a lot, and I like that, and you're funny." And we kept saying, "Okay, great, but is it ministering to you at all?" Right? But it takes a while for people to get to know you, feel comfortable with you, and then they start to feel comfortable with what you're saying, and God starts using it in a deeper and a more profound way over the years. So, yeah, that's been very satisfying.
Let's step through a few of your different career jobs. You mentioned KCFO to start. Maybe a takeaway, something you learned that was you can look back on and say, this is kind of one of those good takeaways from that experience.
We had a great team at KCFO. In fact, a lot of people who are still involved in Christian radio today, guys, like Paul Martin, who was at KCFO in the early days. Roy Williams was KCFO in the early days. Tim McDermott, who you worked for, was at KCFO. So we had this great team of people. And I think one of the things I recognized was putting the right team together. I realized that you needed people, especially in Christian media, you needed people who not only had a heart and a passion for what you were doing, but had some skill and ability. And I saw in Christian media, there were some stations that were gravitating toward hiring people with skill and ability who were only marginally interested in the Christian format.
Yeah.
And then I saw other stations where they were just hiring people. As long as you had a real heart for this, we didn't care how good you sounded on the air. And I thought, you got to have both. You've got to have both giftedness and skill and ability, along with a heart and a passion for this, if it's going to work out well. And we had those people at KCFO in those early days, and that helped shape how I think about things. And I realized, Colin, that at the end of the day, skill and ability is something that you can coach and train and develop. Heart and passion is really, if you have to default towards something, get the people who have the heart and the passion, and then work on skill development, rather than trying to get the highly skilled people and trying to get their heart deepened for the Lord.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Was KSLR after that?
So I had 2 stops in between
Okay.
KCFO and KSLR, as we radio guys often do. I went from KCFO and did a short stint at KRDS in Phoenix, Arizona, an all
Okay.
music AM station in Phoenix. I'd been there for 5 months when I got a job offer to be the general manager at a station in Sacramento, KFIA.
Yeah.
And so I moved from sales manager to general manager of the station. I was there for 9 months, and then in San Antonio after that for the next 7 years.
Yeah. Talk for a moment about your time in San Antonio. What were you doing there, and a takeaway from your time in San Antonio, other than it's really hot in August?
We loved our time in San Antonio. I took away about 20 pounds worth of tortillas that I still
Okay.
carry with me
All right.
today. Um, and I've got on, I should show you, I've got on my Spurs t-shirt here
Hey,
today.
hey, hey, there you go.
I'm
The
still wearing.
Admiral. Yeah, there
Yeah,
you
that's
go.
right. So I took away a love for the Spurs. Um, but professionally, again, a great team, a great passion for our market. I began to recognize, I'd say the two takeaways from that was a radio station, a Christian formatted station in any city has the opportunity to be a catalyzer of what God is doing in that city among different churches, pulling people together for unified causes. You don't want to supplant the local church, but to the extent that you can draw church people, God's people together for bigger events. We had a night where Josh McDowell came in to
Mhm.
talk about purity, and we had about 7,000 people come out to the Alamo Dome. Well,
Wow.
no local church would be able to pull that off on their own, but as a local radio station, we could draw from all churches and bring them in to hear Josh McDowell. So i I saw my role as being not just the manager of a station, but I wanted to think like a shepherd in that community and say, what can I be doing to advance the work of the kingdom? I have this asset, or this resource that I'm privileged to have, that a local church doesn't have. How can I help local churches? How can I help catalyze what God is doing in San Antonio? The other thing, I'd been there for about a year when we started a local call-in talk show, because I recognized that a station needs to have, uh, we often call this, in broadcasting, we call it a stationality, a personality. People need to identify not just with call letters, but with people and a personality of the radio station. And so I became the front face of the station, so that listeners, when they would tune in to listen to our station, they felt connected to me as the representative of that station. And honestly, I think in the area of broadcasting, and I don't know how many of the folks who are watching are involved in this, but I think in the area of broadcasting, one of the things that suffered over the last 10 to 15 years is that stations have lost some of that personal connection, that personality. It's become more automated. There's more voice tracking. There's less of a personal presence. And I think it's one of the reasons that people are looking around and saying, do I have other options to listen, or can I listen to a podcast like this where I feel like there's more of a personal connection than I have with the announcer on the station who's telling me the time and the temperature and introducing the next song.
You've kind of just touched on this as part of it, but I want to, before we get to family life today and your time there, in those early years of radio, both in KCFO and then your two in between stations, KSLR. Uh, as you look back, what did you think of the role of creativity being? It's something that those of us who've been on the air, who've hosted a program, know it's critical. But is it something you talked about? Did you talk about creativity? Did you talk about trying things, innovation with staff people? Talk for a moment about that.
Yeah, we talked about it a lot, and we talked about the fact that um, that there are certain elements to what you do as a station that need to be static and dependable. So people who are listening in the morning need to know that it's dependable, that the news is playing at this time, or that there are certain elements of the program that they come to count on and depend on. They look forward to those things, and yet there needs to be some level of unpredictability so that it doesn't sound like you're just going through the motions. And you've got to be innovating, and you've got to be thinking, what do I bring today that's going to cause people to stop and go, oh, wait, and turn up the radio a little bit and go, what's happening now? And I think those creative elements are an essential for what we do in media to cause listeners to go, this is not just, they're not just going through the motions here, but they've given some thought to this. There's some creative things that we're trying to do, and for audience engagement. And that's what we're not just looking for listeners, we're looking for people to be engaged with us as listeners. And for audience engagement, you've got to be innovating, and you've got to be doing creative things. And a lot of that shows up in the form of promotions that you do at a local radio station. It's the on-air sound, but it's also what kinds of activities can you do. When I was in Phoenix, uh, Christian music companies, this is 1984. So I think the very first Christian music videos came out in 1984, and there were like 7 of them available. Well, where is anybody in the world going to watch 7 Christian music videos? Because there was no internet. There was
Right.
they weren't on MTV. So I thought people need to see these videos. What do we do? And I called the local family pizza chain that had a big screen TV. And I said, can we do a music video night? And we'll just run the same 7 videos over and over again and invite listeners out. And the first night I said, can we just use your room and do this? We won't charge you anything. Well, they had such a rush of people that they said, could you come back and do it next week? And I said, well, now let's talk about what it costs you to do a promotion like this on the radio station. And that's part of how you get the revenue to support what you're doing. So yeah, creativity, innovation. If you're not doing it, somebody's going to come along and do it, and people are going to gravitate toward them instead of you.
Related to Christianity, Christian radio, and related to Christian teaching and conversation like you had at Family Life, is there space for entertainment? And do you say that just falls under that realm of creativity?
Well, I hope there is, because we tried to include some of that in what we did at Family Life Today. When I went from KSLR to Family Life in 1992, I wanted, my passion was, how do we get this information about marriage and family to as many people as possible? But how do we do it in such a way that there's audience engagement? And how do we bring some of that morning show sensibility to long form talk radio formats? I've got nothing against solid Bible teaching. I listen to it a lot. This morning, as I was driving around, I was listening to a sermon from a pastor because I'm getting ready to preach on the same passage this week. I wanted to hear how another pastor handled that passage. And I've grown tremendously from listening to Bible teaching. But I also knew that if we could do something that would be fun and fresh and innovative, and here's what happened, Colin. The very first day that Dennis Rainey and I sat down to record the first Family Life Today programs, we recorded 10 programs one afternoon. This was in October of 1992. And in the first program, which was a let's meet Dennis Rainey, that was the idea. And I asked Dennis a question about conflict in marriage. And he said, well, he said, Barbara and I we had a disagreement last week. And he started talking about the disagreement and how they got it resolved. And later on in the program, Dennis said something, and it just struck me funny. And I threw in some random ad lib comment. We both laughed about it. We got all done, and I said, the story you told about you and Barbara in conflict, we can edit that out if you want to, because this is national radio and you're a national leader in marriage and family. Do you really want to be talking about having an argument with your wife? And he said, well, it really did happen. And he said, I've learned over the years that when I tell people the truth about my marriage, there's more ministry that happens there than if I try to present the idealized picture of things. And then I said, and what about that part where we yucked it up a little bit? And he said, that's who we are. Let's leave that in.
That's good.
And so, yes, we tried to have some fun and some playfulness. And I think that was a trademark of what we did on Family Life Today for years. We never wanted it to be irreverent. We never wanted it to be inappropriate, but listeners told us often that they liked laughing along with us. And it was nice to tune into something that had a serious topic about it, but didn't take itself too seriously.
Yeah, in a world where life is serious and even some of the topics you're dealing with are serious, that humor I know played a huge role, and so appreciate the way that you all dealt with that. Well, 2 decades at Family Life. Uh, you spent a time as chief content officer. I don't know if you thought of that yourself. That's pretty creative. Uh, Talk for a moment, maybe a couple of takeaways from your time at Family Life.
Well, part of a content officer's job is to create your title. So I did create that title as chief
Great
content
job.
officer. But we recognized at Family Life that content was our product. I mean, when you come right down to it, we have a view about marriage and family that's found in the scriptures. It's what the Bible teaches: practical biblical help and hope for marriages and families. That's what we were all about as a ministry, and coming up with that content and then presenting that content in a variety of channels, whether it's small group Bible studies, books, video series, radio, podcasts. You're really looking for how does that content flow through the channels in a way that more people can access it and be helped by it. And and in a ministry, Family Life was a large ministry. We had almost 400 people working at Family Life when I was there, and we recognized there needed to be some consistency and some conformity. We weren't just saying this is what Dennis Rainey has to say about things, but we had a variety of voices, a variety of people speaking on these things. But we needed to make sure that the message, while there was some distinctiveness to it, it was uniform in terms of the biblical content we were presenting. So my job as the chief content officer was to figure out what are the best channels, the best ways to get content to people, and then how do we maintain that consistency and that uniformity so that somebody doesn't hear us saying one thing on the air, hear us saying something different at a conference, and then read something in an article online that says it even a third way. We wanted to be speaking with one voice on what the Bible has to say about marriage and family.
Just a couple of more items I want to touch on before I let you go, and I appreciate your time again today. You have become an author in the last number of years. I think your first book was it right around 2000?
Yeah,
First book?
1999, wrote a book
Okay.
called The Christian Husband. And then 2 years ago in 2020, I wrote a book called Love Like You Mean It, which is 1 Corinthians chapter 13 applied to marriage. So if we're going to say I love you to one another, if we're going to pledge that we will love and honor and cherish one another for a lifetime, we ought to know what it is we're promising. And 1 Corinthians 13 gives us the template. So I kind of walked through that passage. It's a part of me. People here who know me through radio and have heard me um, know that content is important to me, but I love teaching the Bible. And
Yeah.
for the last 14 years, I've been a local church pastor and the main teacher at our church. And so to have an opportunity in a book to go through a passage and apply it to marriage, that's what Love Like You Mean It was all about. And very grateful for that book.
How would you say applying creativity and innovation in a radio program or radio format differs from putting it into a book or a sermon?
Well, I think, and this is something that I've talked with a lot of people about over the years. We grew up being taught how to write by our second grade teacher and then our fifth grade teacher. And then in junior high and high school, you were taught how to write essays and formal writing and creative writing. I mean, I took all of those classes. When you write something, you are writing for the eye. You're writing for it to be read. And people process things they read differently than they process things they hear. And so there is a distinction. It's the same content, but if somebody took a transcript of this conversation and put it in print, they would say, well, that needs to be cleaned up a little bit in order to be in print. I mean, it's not how you would write it formally. By the same token, if somebody is writing to present via speech, you need to be reinterpreting what you put on paper for the spoken word. And a lot of people struggle with that and they want to just read what they wrote. Well, you can't do that. You've got to be conversational. You've got to be able to express yourself. You have to know the medium you're in to know what's the right way to communicate through that medium. So writing for a book is one discipline. Writing sermon prep is another discipline. I manuscript my sermons, but I don't read those manuscripts. And then what we're doing, conversation, dialogue, being on radio, that's a third discipline. All of them take kind of a different skill set for communication.
Finally, you mentioned being a pastor now for 14 years, and you even referenced it a little bit during your days at KSLR, being a shepherd to a community in a way, not as a local church is, but the ability to platform churches and to platform ministries, and in some ways to shepherd those maybe who were even relying at times on the radio station, though they shouldn't be probably relying on the radio station for their spiritual nourishment. Now you're actually, for these last 14 years, have been in a role of standing in that pulpit and leading a pastorate at a church. Just talk for a moment about what that's meant to you personally to be able to share God's word. You talked about how much you love it. And also, because this podcast now and in the future will talk about leadership, the importance of that role of pastor shepherd and the responsibility that you feel for that.
Well, I think the local church is central to what God is doing on planet Earth. I think it's vital. I've always been an active local church member, and then in planting Redeemer Community Church 14 years ago, I'm just very passionate about the work of the local church. I think of a local church like a spiritual gym, and I think of a pastor like the head of the personal trainers who work at the gym, and our job as we get there is to help the people who are coming to the church. First of all, to help them with their own spiritual workouts and help them get stronger spiritually, help them grow in their spiritual objectives, but then also get them part of helping them grow is training them to become trainers of others, to pass on the faith to others, to become disciplers as well as disciples. So it's a great joy getting to do what I do. It's been a wonderful privilege. I was thinking about it this week. I talked to so many pastors who are discouraged and who have had real hardship in their churches and have gone through real tough things. My local congregation has been such a blessing to Marianne and me both. I've been insulated from a lot of what a lot of pastors have had to deal with, and I'm grateful for that. I will say that between politics and COVID masking, I've just gone through the two biggest leadership challenges I've faced
I bet.
as a local church pastor, trying to promote unity in the gospel
Yeah.
in a culture where unity is not prized or valued. In fact, people are working against unity. And so trying to figure out how do we keep drawing people together in the message of the gospel when we live in a culture that's trying to polarize us and put us into platoons with certain ideological views. So that's the leadership challenge that I think is going to be ongoing for many of us who are pastors.
Final item, and I think you'll give me a little leeway here on the time. As I mentioned, your wife, Marianne, who I know has been a great partner through many years. You have 5 kids and 9 grandkids. What a
10, it's up to
blessing that is.
10.
Oh, 10. Okay,
Yeah,
we'll
we're at
correct
10
that.
now.
10,
Yeah.
10 grandkids.
Yeah.
Uh, you've lived your life in a creative space. Do you think you've ever uh, purposefully or intentionally engaged your kids or grandkids in a creative moment or in creative spaces because of what it's meant to you, because of creativity in your own life, or taking the opportunity maybe to praise them or to take extra time for some that are living in that space just because it's been such a key part of your life for so long?
Yeah, I think what we've done, first of all, we're consumers and we value creativity. So those who are creative, we love when other people are creative. So Friday nights at our house was Friday night movie night, and our kids can tell you about all of the old black and white movies from the 40s and the 50s that they were force fed by mom and dad, watching and having fun with those. But we were engaging them in learning how stories are told and how stories are made. Music's been a big part of my life and a big part of our family. So my kids will tell you that for Christmas in their stocking, they would often get a new CD that would widen their musical. I said, I'm giving this is part of your musical education. You need Buddy Holly's greatest hits because you
Yeah,
need to understand that Buddy Holly was influential, or Simon and Garfunkel's greatest hits,
yeah.
or those. So I was always trying to platform what I thought were good efforts at creativity. And then as they started to become engaged in creative activities, whether it was writing or music or whatever they were, our kids were in plays at school. We were there cheering them on, supporting them, affirming that, just putting all the fertilizer around that we could. And I'll just say this, Colin, I read a quote by Ken Geyer years ago who said, good art, good creativity is like a step stool in a room with tall windows. He said, good art helps you to step up on the step stool. You can now look out a window and you can see things you couldn't see before. You had light in the room, but now you get things exposed that you couldn't see before. And I think that's part of the purpose of good art and creativity, is to help us see things that our limited experience. I just watched the movie Belfast. Well, I have a better understanding of growing up in Ireland in the 60s as a result of that. Watching the movie Schindler's List years ago gave me a deeper understanding of what it must have been like. So good art takes us places and exposes us to things that that broaden our horizons, and I think our capacity for emotion and for understanding as human beings.
That's great. Well, Bob, I could talk to you all day, and we probably have a lot of similar interest on many things, but I'm just so grateful for your time. Thank you for so many years of great radio, so many years of incredible ministry, lots of great humor that you shared, you and Dennis and others through the years, those special Name That Tune nights at NRB, National Religious Broadcasters Conventions, and just so many other things, including your books. And I know your congregation feels the same way as well. You have been a longtime blessing to me, and I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you for taking the time today to be with us.
Great to be on. Thanks for the invitation. I've enjoyed it.
Bob Lepine, and again, he's latest book, Love Like You Mean It, The Heart of Marriage That Honors God. He's a pastor, teaching pastor and elder at Redeemer Church in Little Rock. And you still hear his voice on Truth for Life with Alistair Begg. And so grateful to Bob for being here today. Before we wrap today, I do want to share two things that I'm trying to put in at the end of every video blog. And that is a quote that I find interesting or compelling about creativity or innovation or engagement, and also a picture that kind of makes you think for a moment. I want to share both of those with you today. First, I'll share this quote. It says, innovation comes from people who take joy in their work. Innovation comes from people who take joy in their work. I don't know if that's always the case, but I certainly see that in the life of Bob Lepine. He took joy in those things that he did. I have experienced that in my own life. And that desire to create, that desire to innovate, often to me comes from the joy of doing that work. A picture I'd like to share with you today, I just came across it a couple of nights ago, just looking at pictures, trying to feel inspired. How about this one? Look at it. You see the ant on the limb carrying a double grape, which is about 20, 30 times the size of the ant. And if you've ever seen these videos or these pictures, you'll notice that the ants can carry quite a bit more than their weight. I don't know the official amount, but it's a lot. I'm reminded first, I think, of the verse in scripture that says, look to the ant, you sluggard, because if I had it my way, I'd probably be watching those movies Bob was talking about most of the time, or listening to good music. But I have to push myself to do the things that God has called me to do sometimes. It's a joy, but sometimes it's hard work. And I looked at this ant the other day and I thought, man, that is hard work. That ant is carrying a lot of stuff, and it's bigger than that ant. That ant could have looked at those grapes and said, there is no way I can carry that back to where I need to carry it. But the ant does, and they did. And back at the headquarters of the ants, they're happy for the grapes. But it's easy to look at those circumstances in our lives sometimes and think, it's just too much. I just can't handle it. It's just too much. Well, the truth is, God gives us the ability to handle so much, but many times only through His Spirit and His strength. And I encourage you today to lean into that as those tough times come, as those huge, huge obstacles come. lean into him. He has been faithful to me. I know he's been faithful to Bob and others for many years. I encourage you to take an opportunity to lean into him today. I do want to encourage you before I go to subscribe to this podcast, the video podcast. It's on my new YouTube channel, Lambert Creative Media. I want to encourage you to go there and subscribe. It will let you know when things are coming, let you know when things are posted. And also, I want you to share this. If you're listening through to it, you think it might be an inspiration to someone who's interested in radio, or someone who's been involved in marriage ministry, or who's been an author or wants to be an author, maybe even a pastor, might be encouraging to them as well. Share it. And of course, if you feel led, I would love it if you would like it or rate it and leave a review, a comment. I would love to respond to your comments as well with any questions, comments, or anything else you'd like to leave. That would be awesome as well. Just so grateful for you taking the time to share a few minutes here. I hope you made it through, and hope you enjoyed the time today with Bob Lepine. Each and every week or every other week, we're going to be doing this again to inspire, to encourage, to motivate, to spur on that creative process. I hope it's helpful to you in the process as well. It is helpful to me. If no one else is learning, I'm learning along the way, and I'm grateful to you for your time today. Innovation, Insights from Innovators, brought to you by Lambert Creative Media. I'm Colin Lambert. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week.